Hello, hello. I have a terrible cold, so you might hear that in my stuffy voice, and also my sniffling. And also, there is music downstairs, which has got this kind of thumpy beat going on, which might be a soundtrack for this video, or else maybe you can't hear it. I don't know. But anyway, apologies for the distractions if you notice them. I thought I would do a video anyways to kind of update you about how I'm living and what I'm reading and these things, right? So to begin with, I went to Bath for Halloween. I was invited by my lovely friend Laura, who I read the Weasels book with together. The Weasels? I don't have them anymore. I'll put a picture of it here. We read this a while ago, actually, and we both had mixed feelings about it. I think I liked it a little bit more than her. It's kind of 3 vignettes, and there weren't enough weasels. Only one of them really had weasels in it. The first one had a lot of fish though, and like lots of animals and stuff is cool. Maybe I'll do another talk about it some other time. But anyway, in Bath, I went to the Mary Shelley house because Bath is where Mary Shelley wrote most of Frankenstein after she came back from Switzerland. Where she had this crazy dream, and the museum is really good because it shows you a lot of like her life, and also the book, and it's kind of spooky, so they've got like creepy pictures all over the place, and it's going for like kind of like gothic interactive experience slash museum. There's even a basement which has got like a horror themed thing, so all of that was really great. And also I guess because Jennifer Brooks, the booktuber who sadly passed away earlier this year, was super into Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley was like one of the literary figures that that Jennifer like obsessed about. You could see all that passion and enthusiasm always on her channel. So yeah, just being there kind of made me feel nice because I'm doing something and kind of living in a way that she would approve of. So that was also kind of a nice thing about being in Bath on Halloween. Also, the actual baths, like the baths that give it the name Bath, are these Roman baths, and they're so interesting. I'd never actually been inside them. I've been to Bath a bunch of times, but never inside the baths. And anyway, lots of cool Roman Celtic stuff all like fused together, and I really recommend it if you're in the UK or if you go to the UK. As for Halloweeny books that I read around the Halloweeny time, this was one of them. This I got in Seattle. It's called Beyond. It's a bunch of short stories by the Uruguayan. Is it Uruguayan? Oh my god, I forgot. I think it's Uruguay, right? Yeah, Uruguayan writer. Sometimes the South American countries on that side I get a bit mixed up with, but Quiroga, Horacio Quiroga. I really like what I've read from him before. This is so mixed. So it's like kind of short gothic stories that are often about madness and often from the point of view of narrators who are kind of going crazy. The best ones are the more simple ones like this one called The Flies. It's just like 4 pages, and it's just about somebody who dies or is dying and in the jungle, and they're listening to flies slowly starting to gather, and it's great. It's freaky. It's something kind of like there's something spiritual almost about the idea of the transmutation of flesh which takes place in decay, and like there's a kind of mystical spiritual quality to a lot of these ones. They're kind of like they're reaching for something transcendental, and I don't think it really succeeds in a lot of them, and I think that might just be the translation, because honestly this translation is not good. Some of it just the sentences are so clumsy that I can't believe it's the writer. I feel it's got to be the translator, which is a shame. The translator is Eliza Tabor. It says here, Eliza Tabor writes and translates herself into an absent presence. So I don't know, that's just the kind of biography that also makes me feel a little, I don't know, it just sounds a little pretentious. There's also, then it says, An Archipelago in a Landlocked Country is her first book. And it's, I don't think it's a great title either, but like, anyway, let's just put that aside. I am enjoying this, although it's going slowly. Another Halloweeny thing that I wanted to read was Trouble with Lichen, and I'll put the picture here. Trouble with Lichen is not actually Halloweeny at all. It's because it's by one of my favorite writers, John Wyndham, who writes sci-fi, which is often quite spooky and often like kind of got a horror inflection in it, and it's often like kind of about the apocalypse. So yeah, I thought this was one of his lesser known novels, so I didn't expect much from it, but I thought at least it would be good spooky fun. Little did I know, It wasn't good spooky fun. It's about a scientist who discovers a type of lichen which is going to have vast consequences for human civilization, and then she decides to keep it a secret. So yeah, it's kind of like going into the way that she decides to keep it a secret, even though she actually wants to reveal this eventually to the world, and her motivations, and also it's about the nature of what the discovery is, which I don't think I need to say now because I quite enjoyed reading it and finding it out for myself. You find out like in the third chapter or something, but still it's cool. And yeah, it's like not scary at all, so I was wrong about that, but I was also wrong because it's so good. It was such a good audiobook experience, and it's like, I don't know, completely made me reassess my ideas about this writer John Wyndham, because I always thought one of the things that he's not so good with is gender, because he often has some gender stuff in his novels. Because he often has gender stuff like in his novels, like his most famous one, The Day of the Triffids, and like it doesn't always work so well. He was writing in the 50s, and so yeah, like that kind of doesn't gel so well with the 21st century often. So I thought that was like his weakness. But this one, like, there's still a little bit of that, but it's all about gender and it's all about feminism. The main character is a woman for the first time that I've read in one of his novels, and she's like his best main character easily. This book was written in 1960, I think. I was going to say end of 50s, I think 1960, and it is like trying to imagine how there could be a second wave of feminism, because obviously that hasn't happened yet in history. And so he's using and the characters in the book are using the first wave of feminism, like votes for women and suffragettes and all that, as a basis for, how a second wave could happen. So for me, like, apart from the fact that feminism is cool and interesting, like, it's just one of the most charming things about reading old science fiction is how they imagine the future from their standpoint. You know what I mean? Because it tells us so much about like that time. Like, I don't know, it's like the computers on the Nostromo in Alien having like these green like letters and numbers just like going down in scrolls and like these big chunky fonts and all that, like, because that's what computers looked like in the 1970s, so they're like, well, I guess it would just be this but bigger and more screens. So yeah, imagined futures from the past is like something that I find super interesting in general, and also especially if it's feminism, that just adds a whole extra level to it. Although I guess the book got dated pretty fast because like the second wave of feminism happened right after he published it, so maybe that was unfortunate for him in a way. It probably felt like a really old book really quickly because women actually did mobilize and create a second wave, and it's not really in the way that John Wyndham thought it would be. I also read this one, In the Dream House, which is again not really a horror book, although she kind of writes it like a horror book. It's a memoir, but she, like, for some passages of it, especially like at the beginning, her name is Carmen Maria Machado. Machado draws on the horror genre. She's obviously really into it. I think she's written some horror before, but she writes about the dream house like it's a haunted house. This is the place where she and her ex-partner moved to live together for a short time. And it's an abusive relationship, and the book is about that relationship and like the writer kind of coming to terms with the abuse and what happened. So it's quite serious. So sometimes it feels like, I guess you shouldn't talk about horror as a genre with horror and like real life serious stuff, and like it's kind of difficult to combine those things without devaluing the seriousness of the real life stuff. But I think she does a good job of that. The haunted house and sort of the idea of a relationship or a past of trauma being attached to a place and that being a haunting thing is super interesting and well like written about, but it's only a part of the book. The more interesting thing in the book is the way that it's written in little like each chapter, like here we have Dream House as Chekhov's gun, is like she's writing almost like a short encapsulation of what the whole relationship is as one episode or one way of imagining the dream house. Dream house is kind of a metaphor for the relationship, I guess, or the place that she was trapped in or something like that. But there's quite fun and playful. There's Dream House as sci-fi thriller there, and so the form kind of changes a lot as we go through, and it's that kind of fun, that kind of playfulness in the writing makes what would otherwise be really quite grim content really engaging and exciting to read. I kind of feel like it's difficult for me to criticize it in a way because there were things I didn't like it, but at the same time, it's like if someone writes a memoir about their trauma and then if you criticize it, you're kind of saying, well, I didn't really like the way you decided to express yourself about these serious things that happen in your life. So I'm sure there's a good way to criticize it that I just is beyond me, but I do know there were some things that I didn't like, and there were some things that I really liked, and overall it was a good book and I liked it. Then another surprisingly Halloweeny one, well, I feel it's kind of Halloweeny, that I was reading was the complete English poems of John Donne. I think it's pronounced John Donne. I always want to say John Donne when I see it written down, but it's John Donne. It's a kind of gothic looking book to begin with, isn't it? I mean, he looks cool there, I think. I like this picture of him. He looks, I don't know, he looks sort of sinister and like a mystical, and I love his outfit, and it's all dark and it's great. I only knew one poem and one bit of writing from him, the poem being The Flea, which is a great kind of seduction / desperate loser horny guy poem, but using also it's kind of like body horror with a flea. And then the writing that I'd read by him was just like, it's often written as a poem. It's the one that goes For Whom the Bell Tolls that Ernest Hemingway took his bit for the book. But yeah, I really like that. But anyway, yeah, I really like the little things I'd read by this poet, so I wanted to read more, and I just happened to see this in the library, and I added it to my big library pile that I talked about in my last video. I've just been like kind of skimming through it and then like dipping in and dipping out. And yeah, the flea kind of, what I said, like body horror thing, I think that really fits with a lot of his poetry. He writes often love poems, often kind of religious poems, and like about like this excess of feeling. And often it's like the way he writes is that like he feels things so much that they have to take on like flesh. So it's kind of grotesque. I think so anyways. Like he's talking about like somebody that he loves, and then there's a tear coming from her eye, but he can see his reflection in her tear. So it's like then his sorrowful being is like kind of trapped inside of her liquid sorrow, but he's happy because he's now inside a part of her body, which can. And it's like kind of what are you on, mate? Like in the first poem, he says, "Love must not be, but take a body too. And therefore what thou wert and who I bid love ask, and now that it assume thy body I allow, and fix itself in thy lip, eye and brow." So I don't exactly understand it, but I'm pretty sure he's saying that like his love can't just exist without being like embodied by something, and so he's asking his love to understand her body and then take its form in her lip, her eye and her brow. It's like quite specific bodily pieces there, which are now like kind of impregnated or inhabited by his emotions that he couldn't contain. So there is something quite like kind of pleasantly weirdly sinister, I think, about this. I don't think that's the idea, but I'm loving it anyways. Body horror from the 1600s. Let's just park like vaguely Halloween related things because I've been reading so much good stuff. I'm like in the middle of millions of things. I just started Glorious Exploits by Ferdia Lennon, which is so much better than I thought it would be. Sorry. I'm reading The Exploits of Moomin Papa, which is just as like wonderful as I dreamed it would be. This is amazing so far. I'm really enjoying Outline by Rachel Cusk. I'm doing a slow burn read of A Woman Running in the Mountains because I found out that this book, like the last book I read by Yuko Tsushima, goes through a year slowly, and so I'm enjoying reading it slowly through a year as well. I've gotten up to winter now, so I'm going to stop for a while before I get back to that one. And I started reading Autumn by Ali Smith. I also just like on a whim was like, I want to read Autumn, and I DNF'd it. I also DNF'd, where is it? This one, The Prodigal by Derek Walcott, which has beautiful poetry in it, but it's just quite boring actually, and it's about an old man, like the writer Derek Walcott, and he's traveling around the world and he's kind of remembering what it was like to be young and like people that he met in the world, and usually like waitresses and just young women, and he kind of like leches over them, but then like it's beautiful and transcendent, and it's not really relatable for me. It's kind of like, all right, like that was your life, okay. And I don't know, it's very like old man looking back thing. In autumn, on the train to Pennsylvania, he placed his book face down on the sunlit seat and it began to move. Right? So simple but so beautiful, and I could just talk about why I like that opening for ages, but I won't. And I found loads of great lines like that, but it was just beautiful lines that really like impacted me, whereas the whole poem was, the poem as a whole was not really working for me. So I gave up on that. I've been reading in a really piecemeal, scattergun kind of way lately, which is suiting me just fine. I've also read 3 books at the British Library. I wanted to tell you about the British Library from last time. So I registered at the British Library, and I've been there several times now. It's weird. It's like not like a normal library. It has, I think every book that's been published in the UK has to have a copy in the British Library. So if it's made it to this country, then it is accessible there. And there's loads of books which have been published in this country like historically, but are now completely out of print. So the British Library is a great resource for that. And then there's also things like the manga Dungeon Meshi, which they don't have them in my library. So that was one of the 3 that I got there. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First of all, to get there you need to like register, and it's like an airport. You need to like have like paper, you have to sign forms and give them a photo and all this stuff. So it was like getting like a visa almost, and that took a bit of time. But once you're registered, and anybody can do it, right? Any member of the public can do it. You don't need to be connected to some institution or whatever. But once you've done that, then you get a reader's pass, which is a card, and then you can go into their special readers' rooms. And you can't bring bags. You can bring little plastic special British Library approved bags, which you can put your laptop in, and some other things. No pencils, no pens, no food, no water. And no water surprised me, but I guess it makes sense if they've got all this precious stuff there that they don't want to get wet. So you go in, and it's like this big fancy room with all these like Harry Potter bookshelves and stuff like that. And you have to go and talk to people, which feels wrong to like speak because it's so silent. There's so many people reading at their little tables, which are very nice tables, quite big, and you get a nice chair and you get a nice reading lamp and little, if you want, there's like foam things that you can put your book to give it like a bit of a tilt. So it's not just flat on the table. So that's all nice. And what I ordered in was The Broken Jug by Heinrich von Kleist, which was it's a German comic play written in the early 1800s. The Tower of London, which is a translation by Damien Flanagan of all the things that the Japanese writer Natsume Soseki wrote about his experience in London. So the translator also edited and collected all the London stuff and put it together. And then finally, Dungeon Meshi Volume 5, which is a manga about a fantasy team going into a dungeon to find a girl who's been eaten by a dragon and rescue her, and they have to eat lots of food while they're there, and it's the best thing ever. And so it looks like, very childish, like the cover and the back has like pictures of all the monsters you're going to encounter in this volume. And so to be in this really erudite place of learning and to have these kind of fancy books and everything is just so fancy, and then to have my like little manga slapped on the top, like it felt funny, like because you have to get it from the people. It's not like waiting for you in a box or something like that. I didn't feel embarrassed, but I did feel like, I don't know, like a little, my manga was a sore thumb sticking out, and like the fact that I'd ordered it especially to be brought from the archive in Yorkshire all the way down to London so that I could read it in this fancy place. I felt almost defiant, like when they were looking at it and looking at me. I was like, yeah, go on, are you going to say something to me about my picture book? I'm ready, come on. But yeah, it was a really good time. And now I've read all of them, and they were all brilliant for their own special reasons. I suppose the only bad thing about that room was that both for the manga and the comic play, they're so funny, and I usually don't laugh very much when it comes to reading books. Or consuming media, generally speaking. Usually I laugh more like with other people rather than like watching a movie or reading a book. But I laughed a lot when I read this manga, and the German play. I started reading it in Canada, and I laughed a lot when I started reading it there. So I would have laughed loads, I think, if I was reading these at home or somewhere where it wouldn't be like really weird to laugh, because like you could hear a pin drop in this room, and it's a huge room with these high vaulted ceilings. And anyway, that's enough for now. I think some of these I want to talk about more in depth, but I'll do that when the time comes, rather than try and stick it into like this video and make it like an hour-long video or anything like that. So yeah, if you're disappointed because I didn't go as in depth for any of these books, then fear not. I'm sure I will talk about them more. Have a good day, evening, night, and I'll catch you in the next one.